I'd say hormone testing is the topic I am asked most about in my work, probably because it's the thing that you all are most confused about. Not surprising, since there isn't really any definitive information on what to test or when to test when you have period and hormone related problems. That's why I've been partnered up with Let's Get Checked, a trusted at-home health testing service that takes the guesswork out of all this testing business for a number of years now. Using Let's Get Checked to test your hormones takes the hassle out of going to your doctor, explaining the tests that you need, then going to a lab, and then waiting for results. Instead, you just order a test kit on letsgetchecked.com, do the test at home according to your menstrual cycle, and ship it back. Within a week, a nurse practitioner will call you to interpret your test results, and the results are also uploaded into your account on the Let's Get Checked website, so you have a record of them, which you always want to have, by the way. Super easy. And because we're talking about iron deficiency on the podcast today, I'm shouting out the iron panel offered by Let's Get Checked so you can see how you're doing in that department. And a pro tip, consider testing your iron in the luteal phase, since iron numbers tend to be higher during that phase than during your period. The test kit is only $99, and right now you can get a 25% discount using the code HORMONES25. Happy hormone investigating! Hi, I'm Nicole Jardim, a certified women's health coach, also known as the Period Fixer, and you are listening to another episode of my podcast, The Period Party, which is what happens when you get the world's leading women's health experts unscripted, uncensored, and on the air. Think of it as Girl Talk Gone Menstrual. On The Period Party, we talk candidly about all of those off-limits topics: periods, hormones, vaginas, fertility, miscarriage, postpartum, and so much more. Join me and my guests each episode for fun, fresh, and truthful conversation, and let us help you develop a deeper understanding of how your body works. Hey there, listeners. Thanks so much for tuning into the show today. I have got a great guest. Her name is Dr. Stephanie Martin. She's a highly accomplished OBGYN who is breaking down iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia for us. We talked about how important this is to women's health and how overlooked it is, from women not knowing the symptoms of iron deficiency or that they need to ask for an iron panel when seeing their doctor, to the fact that 1 in 5 women of childbearing age have iron deficiency anemia. So if any of this resonates with you, please check out getironinformed.com, which is a women's health initiative that encourages women to learn more about their iron levels and how that can affect their health. And by the way, if you're loving the podcast, which I really hope that you are, would you take a few minutes just to review it on Apple Podcasts for me? Pretty please. I'd be so grateful if you did that. Thank you so much. Hi, Stephanie. It's so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, same here. I know. I feel like this topic is near and dear to my heart because I've seen iron deficiency cause all kinds of problems for my clients over the years, particularly as it relates to their menstrual cycles. So I was really hoping that we could start by just differentiating iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia so that everyone has a good understanding of the two.
It's a really good place to start because it gets really confusing. And I think even physicians can confuse it, healthcare providers can confuse it, but iron deficiency anemia always starts as iron deficiency. So iron deficiency just means low levels of iron in the body. And that can be for a variety of reasons, including heavy periods, was a very common one. But those low levels of iron then can lead to anemia, which is also called low blood count or low hemoglobin levels. So in order to make blood cells, red blood cells, you have to have iron. That's an absolutely key component of making red blood cells. So if you don't have enough iron, then you can't make enough red blood cells. So they kind of go together there. Now, to make it even more complicated, that's a fairly basic concept. Low iron can lead to low blood count. Not all low blood count is due to low iron, but in women of that reproductive age years, it's the overwhelming most likely cause. So when you see a woman who's in her reproductive years who has a low blood count, a low hemoglobin, she's anemic, it's almost always iron. Not always, but almost always due to low iron levels.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that totally makes sense. And so then iron deficiency anemia, does that develop over time?
Yes, it takes some time because a red blood cell lives for weeks. And so, once it's made, it goes on its merry way for about a month or so, and then it dies off and it's actually recycled. And those red blood cells, those recycled red blood cells, are the number one source of iron in our bodies.
Oh,
So, as women, if you're losing red blood cells, primarily through periods, and if they're heavy, then you're going to lose even more, then you're behind from the beginning. That's why men don't get it as much as women.
right. Which totally makes sense.
Yeah, so it doesn't develop overnight. It takes some time because first you're going to run out of the iron that you have stored in your body, and you might be able to keep up with it with diet or pills or whatever. But depending on how much you're losing versus how much you have iron you have stored, eventually you're not going to be able to keep up, and the red blood cells are going to start dying off, and you're not going to be able to make more and make more because you just don't have enough iron. And so it can take months to develop, or in some patients, years. But that distinction between iron deficiency, that low iron, and anemia is important because there are women out there, a lot of women out there, who have blood counts that are maybe borderline normal or normal. But if you actually check their iron levels, they're very, very low. So they're just barely keeping up. They're like running on empty all the time.
Right. Yes.
And that causes symptoms too. I mean, you can have symptoms and issues just because you have low iron, even if you're not yet anemic.
Right. Of course. And so, what happens exactly like when you go to the doctor and you get the testing, which we'll get into in more depth, and say you have low iron? I know it's not just a matter of eating more iron rich foods for many of
Yeah.
us because there are a lot of causes for iron deficiency. So, what happens exactly? What do we have to do in order to prevent us from going to the next step of having iron deficiency anemia?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing that you could have it. So if you don't even consider the possibility, and this goes for doctors and nurses and healthcare providers and patients. So if you don't even consider the possibility that somebody could be anemic or low on iron, then you're never going to figure it out. The good news is it's super easy to diagnose. It's the easiest thing I diagnose in my practice every day. A blood count, a simple blood count. Now, most people are going to get blood counts if they're going to the doctor, but not everybody's getting iron levels checked. So that's kind of the next step. So knowing to ask about having your iron levels checked because you can be low on iron and still have a normal blood count. So especially if you've got symptoms, which we'll talk about, but you've got to consider the possibility that you could be anemic or be iron deficient and then get tested for it. That's really the only way to know. And it's a very simple, straightforward, cheap test to do.
Right. So now that you've just said that, what are the symptoms of iron deficiency and are they different to iron deficiency anemia?
So there's a lot of crossovers, but the really interesting thing is that a large percentage of patients with iron deficiency anemia have no symptoms. Now, some of that's because the symptoms can be pretty subtle, maybe fatigue, mental fog. They can be more dramatic, like craving ice. Ice pica, ice cravings is a very common symptom with iron deficiency. I actually saw a patient today with it that had been ignored by other people, but she's craving ice and they have to have special ice. Like they've got to go to that Sonic ice and get that special crushed, easy to chew on ice. I had one patient recently within the last week who told me that for Christmas, she had asked for a special ice maker for her house.
No way.
Yes.
Oh my
and
goodness.
and no one had put two and two together. You're craving ice because you're anemic. And so her husband was very disappointed when I cured her ice cravings with some iron.
Because you spend a lot of money on that
Spent a
ice
lot of money
maker,
on that
that
ice
fancy ice
maker.
maker. That is hilarious, but
Yeah.
also amazing. Why do we crave ice? What is that about?
I've tried to figure this out. No one really knows for sure, but the thought is that maybe the chewing that really cold ice is stimulating to the brain in some way. And so when you get to that degree of iron deficiency, the mental fatigue and fogginess that's described pretty consistently by patients can be fairly overwhelming. And women are really, really good at tolerating a lot. So we say, okay, I'm exhausted because I have kids or I work hard or it's just me or I'm not as strong as everybody else. I just got to suck it up and tolerate it. But these are really symptoms of a potential problem. And iron deficiency is one of them. So mental fog, fatigue, ice cravings, and you can have more significant changes like intolerance to heat and cold and racing heartbeat and changes with your nails and your hair. But Those tend to be much later and in much more severe cases, but the majority of patients will have no symptoms that they identify at all.
Okay. That's really interesting to me because I was thinking, as you said, the mental brain fog and the fatigue. And then you said, of course, everyone feels like, oh, it's just normal. And it really is, right? It's perpetually normalized in our society to just be exhausted and burnt out.
It's
So
like a badge of
ridiculous.
courage. Like there's a competition to see who's the most exhausted. I mean, we really wear it kind of with honor almost instead of recognizing maybe something else is going on. And in our defense, as a woman, even when we bring this stuff up to our doctors and our healthcare providers, we're often poo pooed and ignored. So it perpetualizes that idea that this is just how I'm supposed to feel.
I know it's beyond frustrating. I mean, I see this every single day. I'm sure you do too. And like you said, it's such an easy test to figure out whether that's happening or not. Is there anything else that we should be looking out for? Because a lot of what you describe, of course, sounds like thyroid disease as well, or thyroid issues. And I know iron plays a role in how the thyroid functions.
Yeah. So it's important, number one, I want women to feel empowered that if you feel like you could have anemia or iron deficiency, or especially if you're having symptoms that could be consistent with it, mental fog, fatigue, craving ice, for example, then you need to talk to your doctor about that. And then it's not just that anemia needs to be worked up. They'll do a physical examination and a history and get more information to determine what else needs to be evaluated. But thyroid disease absolutely is one of those silent things that we don't know if that's what the issue is until it's tested. Again, very simple, easy test to do. So it's not unusual as a physician, someone will have these kind of complaints and I'll say, oh, we're going to work you up for both of these things or whatever else the history might suggest. Now, there are some women who are going to be at even higher risk for anemia that really need to know this.
That was my next question.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
So heavy menstrual bleeding, super important. Fibroids. A lot of women have irritable bowel disease like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and that's an absorption problem. So they may not be absorbing enough iron from their diet. In addition to, a lot of these women will have bleeding from the intestinal tract that's either obvious or not obvious. So they kind of got the double whammy for getting iron deficiency. So it can kind of really sneak up on them. And pregnancy. So pregnancy requires a ton of iron. So you might be fine while you're pregnant, but if you have several babies in short succession, you might just tap out on all your iron stores. So, understanding that you could be kind of treading water, keeping that hemoglobin, that blood count maybe normal or near normal, but lacking iron and not knowing it unless it's tested.
I mean, that's such a huge deal. I was actually looking at the Get Iron Informed website that you sent over before this recording, and the stat of 76% of people with inflammatory bowel disease was really eye opening to me that they have iron deficiency anemia, or that it affects up to 75% of people with IBD. It's shocking. And again, it's like I was saying before, it's not just about eating more iron rich foods or taking a supplement. In many cases, it could be something else that you didn't even know.
Absolutely. Now, the most common reason women are going to end up with iron deficiency anemia is usually related to our menstrual cycles. And talk about normalizing the abnormal. I mean, we as women have been, you're probably more of an expert on this than me, but we accept heavy periods and don't understand that this could be a sign of a problem that maybe needs to be evaluated. So that's a big culprit. But I want to follow up on your comment about the diet and the supplements, because a lot of people will give me feedback. They're like, but I eat meat.
Yes. I hear that a lot too.
Yes. And my vegan patients are definitely at increased risk for iron deficiency. So, for those of you who are vegan or vegetarian and don't have a lot of meat sources in your diet, yes, you are at slightly increased risk of getting iron deficiency because of the lack of meat in your diet. That doesn't mean that you need to start eating meat at all. It just means you need to be aware of it. So, you're talking to your doctor and you're getting evaluated. Here's one of the myths: you can get iron from other sources besides meat. There are lots of plant and seafood sources for iron. They're just absorbed differently. So the difference is, and the reason we focus on meat so much, is that the form of iron that comes in meat is better used by your body compared to the form of iron that comes in plants. Like, for example, leafy green vegetables have a lot of iron in them. Oysters have a lot of iron in them. There's a lot of foods that have iron in them. Just it's harder for the body to use it. And so you can get behind in some cases.
I think that's so helpful. And I feel like there's a lot of controversy around this because someone who's plant-based or vegan, they feel really defensive about the fact that, they don't eat meat and they're told constantly that that's really the only way to get it, or it's the most appropriate way to get it. So I feel like it's a constant balancing act. If you aren't eating meat in your diet, you have to really make a huge effort to make sure that you're getting enough of the foods that have high iron content in them.
Right. Or you can take a supplement. Now, the challenge with the supplements is that they're sometimes hard to take. They can really, for some women, they get either real constipated or it can make them nauseated. And so they're not so easy to take. But one of my favorite tricks, so blackstrap molasses, if you're from the South like I am, you know what molasses is. So a tablespoon of blackstrap molasses is the equivalent of an iron pill.
Oh, wow. Oh, I didn't realize it was the equivalent. That's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
fantastic. And so the other trick I tell people is to cook with cast iron because it actually puts iron in your food.
Yes, I do that. I tell people to do
Yes.
that too.
That's another Southern thing, you know?
Yeah, that's so true. I know, right? I know it's become very popular. I knew about the blackstrap molasses, but I didn't realize the equivalency. So I feel like that's something that can be really helpful for people.
Yeah, so I offer that to my patients who really can't take the pill for whatever reason. I'm like, well, put some molasses in your coffee or your tea, or if you can stomach just eating a spoonful of it, go for it.
I know it's an intense flavor for sure. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, everyone, and we'll be right back to talk about testing and all the other things as it relates to this. Testing doesn't have to be confusing or frustrating. Let's Get Checked, the at-home health testing service that I've been partnered with for a number of years, makes testing so easy. Since we're talking all about iron deficiency on this episode, I want to highlight the iron panel offered by Let's Get Checked so you can see if your numbers are normal or not. Get a 25% discount on the iron panel and any other test kits using the code HORMONES25. Hey everyone. So I am talking to Dr. Stephanie Martin, and we're talking all about iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia. And I really wanted to talk about testing because I hear things along the lines of, oh, well, I just got my iron tested. It's normal kind of thing. But I know that there's so much more to adequate iron testing to really determine what's going on with you. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when patients tell me that, I hear that a lot too. I had my iron levels checked and they're normal. And then when I actually review the labs, what they had checked was their blood count, their CBC, their hemoglobin level. And so that is our test for anemia. And all those names are just the names for the same thing. The CBC is the blood test, the hemoglobin is your blood count. It's all measuring the same thing, looking for anemia. And so people think commonly that if they don't have anemia, then they don't have iron deficiency. And as I said before, that's not the case. You can have a normal blood count and still have low iron levels. So you specifically have to have iron levels tested. And there's a couple ways to do that, but the most straightforward way is to check something called a ferritin level. And a ferritin level tells you how much iron you have stored in your body, okay, not in your blood. So it says, all right, you've got adequate levels of ferritin or you don't have adequate levels of ferritin. And if your levels of ferritin are low, then you don't have enough iron stored in your body. And eventually, if you don't fix the problem somehow, then you're going to run out of iron and you're going to end up with a low blood count or anemia.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. And so is there anything else with regard to testing that we should know about?
If you remember nothing else about like what should I ask my doctor for, then those are the two most common tests. There's other tests that we can do that tell us about your iron status in your body, but
Mhm.
those really are the two most important tests. They tell us 99% of what we need to know,
Okay.
and it'll help address that question. Now, on the website, the getironinformed.com website, there's
Yeah.
a guide there that patients can download that's a guide to talking to your doctor about this problem.
Oh, amazing. That's really helpful.
So it's a resource on there for people so you don't have to keep it in your head. You can go to the website, getironinformed.com, and there's information there. And there's specifically a downloadable information packet tool that you can use to talk with your provider about this.
Okay. And I see that you have on that website as well, there are common lab markers, for IDA. And I feel like that is also challenging in a way too, because sometimes you're on the lower end of the range and you're just sort of passed off as being okay, even though you're symptomatic. What do you recommend for patients when they're having that experience?
Yeah, so I think that the first point is to say, okay, have they really completed the workup to make sure that your symptoms are not due to iron deficiency? So they might say, okay, you're exhausted, you're not feeling good, you've got your craving for ice, but your blood count is normal, you're not anemic. We still need to know if you're iron deficient. So that's first step. Now, if they work you up and you're borderline, so let's say your iron stores are a little bit low or maybe right at the cutoff, and your blood count is a little bit low or maybe right at the cutoff, the importance is follow up because over the next month or so, the scales are going to be tipped one way or the other. Your blood count, you're either going to get better or worse in some way. Now, sometimes what we'll do is start people on iron. I see this a lot. We'll just say, okay, look, your blood count's a little bit low, your iron levels are a little bit low. Let's put you on some iron pills. And this is super important. I want all of your listeners to hear. If you've been started on oral iron pills, you need to have some follow up in a few weeks to see if they're working or not. And this is probably one of the biggest mistakes or dropped balls that I see in the management of anemia is that we recognize the problem. We know that the patient has an issue that needs to be addressed. We give her the treatment, but we don't check to see if it worked or not.
Right.
And just giving the pills doesn't mean the problem's going to be solved because not everybody can tolerate them and not everybody is going to absorb it well enough to be able to impact and make their blood count better. And that improvement should happen within a few weeks. It doesn't take months to see if the pills are going to work. You'll know within a few weeks.
Oh, that's really good to know too. I didn't realize that. I assumed that it probably took a little bit longer.
Yeah. So you should see some improvement within a few weeks of taking those pills. And if not, then we can escalate. There's IV iron that I can give. And I tell you, pills are great because they're non-invasive. And when they work, they work. But when they don't, we have other options. And the IV iron is easy, quick to give, and it just bypasses your intestines. So I know it's going to go into your bloodstream and solve the problem.
This would be something that potentially would be better for a person who falls into the GI condition or the malabsorption category.
Yeah. So anybody who can't tolerate the iron pills, you may not have any known bowel disease, but you might not be able to tolerate the iron pills for whatever reason. A good example of this, a lot of your listeners have probably had bariatric surgery of some sort.
Possibly. I mean, yeah, possibly.
Yeah, it's really common now. And so bariatric surgery, anytime they've bypassed or worked on some of that stomach, taken away a portion of that stomach, that's where iron is absorbed. And so if you've had bariatric surgery, you may be one of those patients that I can give you tons of iron pills, but it's not going to be absorbed, in everybody.
Right. I mean, we also need adequate stomach acid as well.
Yep.
So I feel like when I looked at the Iron Informed website, when we were referring to the inflammatory bowel diseases, so someone with celiac or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, they would be sort of those people who would be at risk and potentially even more at risk for the pills not working.
Absolutely. The other groups that are at risk would be like somebody who maybe has kidney disease.
Okay.
Kidneys are really, really important in building blood. And so kidney disease and low blood count anemia kind of go hand in hand.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that that's really helpful for people to know. And so when you give iron, what kind of supplement are you giving? Because I feel like there are a million iron supplements on the market today. And women always say to me, oh, I took iron once and it constipated me. I don't want to do that again. So what do you suggest with regard to that?
So most of the over-the-counter iron supplements are what's called iron sulfate, ferrous sulfate. Okay. And so all of the different iron formulations have limitations. It's kind of complicated, but let's see if I can make it a little bit more simple.
Yeah.
You can say, like, if you go to the grocery store or the pharmacy and you see iron sulfate, it's almost always a 325 milligram pill, but you're not getting 325 milligrams of iron. That pill has maybe about 60 milligrams of iron that is even available for the body to use. And then, even if your body is absorbing iron perfectly, you're maybe going to absorb 6 to 10 milligrams. So that one pill is going to have 6 to 10 milligrams. So this is really all about absorption. So what I mean by that is, if I take the pill, is my body going to use it? Or is it just going to go right through me and cause constipation? And ferrous sulfate is not one of the best ones that's absorbed. Ferrous gluconate is a little bit better, but the bottom line is that the prescription irons are a little bit better absorbed. Your body tolerates them better, but they're very expensive. And so the overwhelming majority of my patients end up having to do the over-the-counter irons that are just not necessarily as well tolerated, but it's kind of what we're left with. If you tolerate it, it's fine. If your body absorbs it and it works and it's raising your blood count, that's all that matters.
Is that all you're looking for when you do the follow-up? Like you're looking at the blood count?
Yeah. So you look at the response. Is the hemoglobin rising? So when we get that blood count, we're looking at that hemoglobin. Is it going up? And then ultimately, the ferritin or your stored iron should also go up because I want to fix the blood count and I want to replace the stores and make sure that there's plenty of iron stored away to use to build blood in the future as well.
Okay. And so if someone has, say, low ferritin, but all the other numbers look fine, what does that typically indicate and how do you address that?
So that's iron deficiency alone.
Okay.
And so not yet anemic. So that one, we're going to fix the iron levels by giving supplemental iron. So she's going to take iron pills, and patients typically notice an improvement in their symptoms quickly after starting iron as long as it's being absorbed in the body.
Right. Okay. And so that's for someone if they had low ferritin, pretty much only. Okay. Yeah, I think that's really helpful because I also hear often from women on social media and things like that. Oh, I tested and I have low ferritin, but I don't know what to do about that. And so, is there a situation where someone might have low ferritin and they take iron and then it doesn't really work for them, probably where there's a gut situation involved or maybe a kidney issue? What do they do next? Do you just do the IV?
Yeah. Next would be IV iron, and that works. I mean, it's very predictable. It's very well tolerated, very rare to have any significant reaction to an IV iron. It's just inconvenient. The good news is it typically only has to go in a couple of sessions. You go into an outpatient infusion center, they give you an IV, they give you the dose, and that happens a couple times, and then you're done. It's kind of instead of having to take iron pills over months in order to replace the iron that you've lost or that you need, we give you that total dose, all the iron that you need in a couple of infusions.
Okay. And do you find that as we move out of the childbearing years into perimenopause and menopause, that iron deficiency issues tend to clear up?
Well, they become a little bit less common, but the causes for it are different. So if I see a woman who's menopausal who has iron deficiency anemia, I'm worried about blood loss. So I'm starting to look at sources of have we screened her for colon cancer? Have we looked for other sources of blood loss because she's no longer menstruating? So why would she be losing blood and losing iron? Or is this an absorption problem? Has she had bariatric surgery or does she have some other kind of bowel disease that we haven't looked at? So I'm doing a little bit deeper workup on that patient to try and understand because the causes change as we age.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's really helpful to know too. And so, coming back to the testing, another stat that you'd shared was that less than half of women have ever had iron panel testing done and did not know that you needed to ask for it in an annual physical. So, can we talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like patient advocacy is a big part of this podcast message.
This really is one of those areas where patients have to advocate for themselves because there's really not even good guidance on when and how to screen for anemia. So this is very much patient driven. So the typical workup for a patient, just for your routine healthcare, when you go for an annual exam or whatever, it's very, very typical that you're going to get a blood count done. It's very, very unusual to have iron levels done unless they are requested or the doctor has some specific reason to think that you might be iron deficient, like if you're anemic. So it's very common for women to have iron deficiency, low iron levels, and have no idea about it because they've never been worked up for it. So I encourage all of you listening to think about, could I have iron deficiency anemia? Go to the website and look and see, could I have it? Do I need to talk to my doctor about it? And talk to them, find out. They may not bring it up if you don't.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I think that, it starts to become complicated when, like you were saying, someone has an underlying condition that's preventing them from absorbing iron and their body getting what it needs. Then you have to go on to work with another specialist to figure out what that might be. Do you have recommendations for people like when you realize that it's something else going on? What are their next steps?
I think if you think there's something going on that's not being addressed, The next steps really are going to depend on what you think that thing is. So, for example, if you've got heavy menstrual bleeding and you feel like nobody's dealing with that, you're not being heard, there's not being options discussed with how to take care of this or work it up or figure it out, you need to see another OBGYN. If you've got symptoms that make you think you could have some bowel disease, like I'm having blood in my stool, I have chronic diarrhea or severe constipation or whatever it may be, and that deserves a workup. And then you're going to go see either a primary care specialist or a gastroenterologist or somebody who has expertise in that area. And sometimes you may need to just ask your primary and just say, look, who do I need to see to figure out if this could be it?
Yeah, I love that. I had someone on Instagram write a comment recently on a post that I'd written about heavy periods. And she said, ladies, listen up. I found the solution for when you're bleeding and you have to change pads or tampons in the nighttime. And if you don't want to wake up, she was like, I just sleep with a diaper on. And I was like, wow. And she says, it
Yeah.
works. It's brilliant. And I'm like, this is where we're at now. This is what's happened
Yes.
to us. It's unbelievable. Because a heavy period, as you said, is a symptom of underlying conditions. And it's constantly ignored as just being a thing that happens.
Absolutely. And it shouldn't be. It's more than just inconvenient.
Yes.
It can lead to significant health issues, and anemia is just one of them.
I know. That's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you as well is what can iron deficiency anemia lead to ultimately? What happens if we just leave this unaddressed?
Well, most women are going to kind of be chronically low, assuming that they're able to eat and drink normally, then they'll be able to kind of limp along, but they're not going to be living their best life. They're going to be fatigued. They're going to have mental fog. They're going to be just exhausted all the time. Now, in severe cases, if it gets bad, it can affect your heart function. It can affect cardiac function over time. If you're pregnant, it causes complications with pregnancy and the postpartum period, increased rates of depression and bonding and all kinds of growth problems, preterm birth. So there are potential downsides, but generally speaking, iron deficiency is so underappreciated because compared to some other diseases, it's relatively well tolerated. And women don't even know that they're tolerating it. They just assume that this is the way life is supposed to be. I'm supposed to have terrible periods and I'm supposed to sleep with a diaper and I'm supposed to feel tired all my life.
It's unbelievable. I know the perpetual normalization of these symptoms is just criminal. I can't get over it. And of course, you and I see the sort of end results of that, where, there are all of these other accompanying symptoms that, like you said, just impact your quality of life to the point where you're just not living your best life, as you said.
Absolutely. So, everybody should feel like they can have this conversation with their doctor. And if you feel like your doctor is not taking it seriously or normalizing your symptoms or not agreeing to work you up, then it's time to find somebody that's a better fit for you that's going to listen to you. The other thing is, these are fairly basic tests, quite honestly. And in most labs now, you can go and order these tests on yourself. You just have to pay for them out of your own pocket,
Right.
in theory.
That's okay, though. I feel like some people are willing to do that.
They're not expensive. So you can determine if you're anemic or not. These are easy tests to order. You don't have to have a doctor's order, but you will probably want some doctor's guidance. And I think most patients want to feel like they can talk to their doctor or their nurse practitioner about what's happening and get some support and some feedback. So I want everybody to feel like they can have that conversation. And if you can't, then you need someone like Nicole, or you need to find a new provider.
Or you. You, definitely you. It's so good and so helpful. And I loved the Get Iron Informed website because I felt like this was such a helpful resource when I was reading about iron deficiency anemia and the symptoms that are associated with it and all of these conditions that could put you potentially at risk. And of course, all the women's health information is there, as well as the gastro issues. And like you said, the chronic kidney failure or kidney disease. So I feel like this is a great resource. Do you think women should just start there just to understand if maybe they have this happening for them?
I would. I think it's a great source of information, kind of all in one place. And that downloadable tool to talk to your doctor is super, super helpful. But I don't want women to be afraid to know if they have iron deficiency anemia. Like, this is one of those things, because we're talking a lot about bowel disease and kidney disease. And I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a terrible diagnosis for me to have. Quite the contrary. This is a very curable disease. This is something that can be managed easily with minimal negative impact and usually has significant immediate results for people. Like, for example, when I have a patient who's craving ice and I start her on iron, it's usually a couple of days and it's gone. It doesn't take months.
Wow. Okay. So it's really that fast. That's awesome.
The symptoms improve pretty quickly. So I just want to encourage people to not be afraid to know if they have iron deficiency anemia. Don't be afraid to bring it up. It's very simple test. And if you know what test to ask for, as a physician, it's harder for me to say no. If you're coming to me and saying, look, I really want to know my iron levels and I want to know my blood count. Can you order those tests? What am I going to say? No, you don't deserve those tests. I'm going to be like, sure, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this too with the connection between iron and our follicle development as well too. And on our ovaries and just the research I've read where iron deficiency really impacts your ability to have healthy ovulation, which will ultimately impact your fertility potentially, but just healthy ovulation is really necessary for a whole lot of other reasons. So I feel like that's another thing too that we just don't even know about. It's like another really important part of it.
That's one of those chicken or the egg situations because often women who are not ovulating are also having a lot of irregular bleeding, which can lead to iron deficiency, which then can impact ovulation, which then can lead to irregular bleeding. And then you get into this vicious cycle. So I think there's a lot more about the impact of iron deficiency on our general health that we don't understand. There's been some interesting studies looking at performance. Like they took young women that were iron deficient and treated them and saw significant improvements in their physical performance just from fixing iron deficiency, and they weren't even anemic. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there. I think the more we're aware of the importance of iron deficiency, the more we're going to learn about it. And I think it's just been underappreciated up to now.
Well, thankfully, you're changing that. Yes. And I was going to say before we wrap up really quickly, what do you think about people just thinking they have iron deficiency based on the symptoms that they experience and then just supplementing? Do you feel like testing is necessary in every case?
That's a really good question. And the answer in short is yes. So the iron that you get just in a prenatal vitamin or in a regular multivitamin or whatever is really teeny, teeny, tiny little amounts. And I have no issue with that at all. It will be a very rare person who's going to have any negative effects from just taking iron pills if you don't know if you're anemic or not. As a physician, I always like knowing what am I actually dealing with before I just start supplements. But it's very difficult to cause harm just from taking iron pills, quite frankly. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the overwhelming majority of women in the United States are iron deficient. 1 in 5 women has iron deficiency anemia.
Wow.
Okay, that has the actual anemia. And who knows how many are iron deficient, but don't yet have anemia. There's a lot more of those. So the majority of women out there can benefit from iron supplements, but there is a very small subset of patients who shouldn't be taking iron because they can cause harm to themselves. That's a very small minority. So as a physician, I do think it's important to get your iron levels tested and to know if you need the supplemental iron. But as a patient, if you're going to take the supplement, I think if I was going to take it, I would then at some point follow up with my provider and say, hey, what are my iron levels? I've been on iron for the last few months.
Okay. And those people who are the small minority, do you mind sharing a little bit about who those people are? Just in case someone decides they're supplementing.
So the most classic group are patients who have a group of inherited anemias. So they've inherited this inability to make blood cells to the degree that we need. So they always have low blood count, and I can give you all the iron in the world. It's never going to get better. Your genes are programmed that way. So they might actually have high iron levels already, just the iron building up because their body can't use it in the proper way. That's an example. So it's called thalassemias. There's a subset. That's just one example. There are others, but that's probably the more common of them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I've learned so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie. Really, it's so helpful.
I really appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. Can you share just a little bit about the Get Iron Informed website and any information you want to share about where you're located and how you can help someone who's struggling with this?
Yeah, I'm based out of Scottsdale, Arizona, and I would encourage everybody to go to the getironinformed.com website. It's got all the resources you need to learn more about this and figure out how to have those conversations with your doctor. But I'm so grateful you had me on. I had a wonderful time.
Oh, thank you so much. And everyone, if this was helpful for you, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. That's a wrap. Be sure to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes and let me and my guests help you to get to know your period and your body better. In the meantime, if your hormones are screaming for more, check out my previous period party episodes. And of course, if you love what you hear, please take a moment to rate the podcast. And if you're looking for an even deeper dive into your hormone and period problems, go ahead and grab my book, Fix Your Period, by going to fixyourperiod.com.